So I've been thinking a lot about Deus Ex Machina, or the act of God, the hand of God, or really good luck. This is basically what it is. It's good luck in storytelling. It's luck that sort of favors your main characters. The Stargate franchise is a really great example of this because both the movie and the series relies heavily on these big acts of God to help our main characters. Without it, they wouldn't have been able to move on from one adventure to the next. But between the different series and the film and all of the other films that came off of those series, there's something that Stargate Atlantis did that I think is really clever. They basically acknowledged how easy it was for their main characters, and they created an episode to sort of retcon why it was so easy. I'm going to explain this to you. So the pilot episode is basically a feature film that was just premiered as a pilot, and it starts off with Stargate Command sending an expedition team through the gate to the lost city of Atlantis. I'm sure you recognize Bobby Patrick. This is Dr. Weir. She is basically in charge of the entire expedition team. She's really important to what I'm going to explain to you later on. This is John Shepard. He will eventually be head of the military team after Robert Patrick dies in the pilot episode. Spoilers. This is Rainbow Sun. This is one of the characters arriving to Atlantis for the first time, and this is the gate that's in Atlantis. So simply by arriving, the dormant city of Atlantis starts to wake up on its own. The computers that sort of run the city turn on the lights and start to sort of reactivate all of the systems because it recognizes that humans have come through the gate. Even in the original SG-1 series, whenever the team found an ancient city, even if it had a little bit of energy to it and they were able to get information off the computer systems, they were never nearly as operational as Atlantis is. And this whole time, Atlantis has been underwater, abandoned, protected by an ever-shrinking force field. And I think by the time they got to the city, the force field was only around the central tower where the Stargate is located. Now, they're under an ocean on a distant planet, and this planet has no infrastructure whatsoever, so whatever energy they do have is coming from within the city. At a certain point, though, their force field starts to get too depleted, and the city automatically begins to surface, and this is the first instance that we see daylight coming in through the windows as it's surfacing. In the show, Atlantis isn't just a city, it's also a spaceship, which is why it can move around. And this is how the pilot episode of Stargate Atlantis ends, on this shot, which tells us they are in a safe place that they are in full control over, and although it doesn't have all the bells and whistles it would normally have, that it had millions of years ago, they at least control it, and they have access to a Stargate, which means tomorrow, or on the next episode, they can start their adventures. Now, if you were to remove the enemy of this series, the Wraith, and just got rid of that whole B through line, what you have is a very interesting story just regarding the city. Like, getting the city operational is a great story in and of itself if it were to be a little less functional. But it was perfectly functional. It's almost as if it was waiting for them to arrive. Well, that's because it was. So later on in season 1, there's an episode called Before I Sleep, in which members of the expedition team find a woman in stasis in another nook within the city. The medical team figures out that this old woman is in fact Dr. Weir, and once they manage to wake her up, she explains that the expedition we've been following all of season 1 wasn't the first attempt at this. And as a matter of fact, the first expedition which she ran failed almost instantly. She explains that when they arrived to Atlantis, the force field collapsed right away. Atlantis got flooded and almost everybody died. And those that didn't died shortly thereafter, and she's the only one who managed to survive. So they reenact a little bit of what happened in the pilot episode, but instead of going on expeditions through the Stargate to meet the Wraith for the first time, they basically deal with a city that's about to kill them. Like the whole first version of the expedition that could have been episode 1
is basically our main characters not realizing that there's an enemy in the Pegasus galaxy because the city that they were hoping to explore wasn't ready for them. And this is a shot of the main gate room flooding in sort of what was the first version of reality, or the first version of their expedition coming through. And the only reason Dr. Weir was able to survive is because she got into a shuttlecraft, which they called jumpers, which had a time device installed in it. And she managed to go all the way back in time to when the ancients actually lived in a fully functioning Atlantis. And this is the guy who invented the time machine. And the time machine was already revealed to us in the SG-1 series, but we hadn't met the guy who built it. She ended up meeting the guy that built it and explained to him what happened. And they sort of hit it off, and he agrees to help her by setting the city up to not completely fail right away, so that her expedition team in the future has a shot at actually achieving what they set out to achieve in terms of learning more about the ancient city of Atlantis. And these are some of the other ancient citizens, or sort of the hierarchy, the people that run the city, and they are so against helping Dr. Weir and the expedition in the future that they're like, no, we're all going to be leaving for Earth soon, and you're going to come with us, and we're going to leave the city empty just as it was, because we do not mess with time. They're not like bad guys, but they're also not great people. Like, the ancients in this show are just kind of douchey, but they were like that in SG-1 as well. But they conspire, and she agrees to stay behind without their knowledge, and they start setting the city up by programming it to surface when it runs too low on energy, but also to retool the devices that actually supply energy to the city so that they're sort of more economical in terms of the amount of energy that they're supplying, so that over the millions of years that this thing is under the ocean and dormant, it's actually conserving more energy than it would have. These are what supply energy to the city. They're called ZPMs. And basically when they arrived to the city initially, they're all depleted, which is why everybody got killed. And this guy figures out how to set them up so that they don't get depleted as quickly. And these are the ancient citizens leaving Atlantis for the final time. We actually get to see their civilization exit through the Stargate and go back to Earth, essentially abandoning the city. And he lies to them and tells them that Dr. Weir had already gone through, so once they leave, the city will be empty, and they buy it. And she watches from the shadows as the final people of the ancient civilization leave, and she's left alone. And then there's this really great shot of her alone at the top of the stairs that go down to the Stargate area, and I just love that shot because she's alone for the next millennia. And we know it, and it's kind of amazing. So she goes into the stasis chamber to wait. And the reason she decides not to go back to Earth is because she has to wake up every 100,000 years or so to sort of do something to the ZPMs, the energy machines, in order to ensure that they're operational. I think she has to take one out and plug the other one in or something like that. So she has her stasis chamber programmed so that she wakes up at certain intervals to do this. So she's really kind of dedicating her entire life to ensuring that another incarnation of her expedition team achieve what they're supposed to achieve. And that's it. That's why it was so easy for them to not only get to Atlantis, but not to die instantly and to kind of get everything operational. She, or the older version of her, sacrificed her entire life to ensure that they actually had a shot. And I think that's a really great retcon. I think that more shows should think thoroughly about how easy it is for their characters and hang a lantern on it. This is called hanging a lantern on it. We understand that it was really easy for them to get to Atlantis and to get set up and to get going with their adventures. So here's a story about why it was so easy. In screenwriting, in television, we call that hanging a lantern. And this is one of the best versions of hanging a lantern I've seen.